Welcome to the Heavy Spoilers Show. I'm your host Paul, aka I'm a turd in your bed, and in this video we're breaking down The Stand. The second episode has just dropped, and similar to the first one, we predominantly follow two characters and see how their arcs both reflect one another. This is of course similar to the first episode, in which we saw things from the perspective of Harold and Stu. Stu was a kind-hearted man thrown in at the deep end who seemed like a genuinely nice guy, a bit like myself. Juxtaposing this though, Harold was a toxic and manipulative stalker that wished to appear as the sort of Stu archetype in order to win the affections of Franny. However, she wasn't fooled, and in the end she fell for Stu instead, which scorned Harold massively. The similarities between the pair are even hinted at in this entry when Stu is believed to be Harold at one point, and I think going forward that most of the episodes will follow two characters. This time we're in the shoes of singer Larry Underwood and a criminal named Lloyd who becomes locked up in a prison. Larry is a thief who stole his friend's songs in order to become famous, but in the end he doesn't really receive any comeuppance. He's seen as a rock star amongst his peers, and this is very much mirrored in Lloyd, who is too actually referred to one at one point in the episode. This is because he's believed to have killed a policeman, but we learn that isn't actually the case, and thus both are pretending to be something that they're not in order to rise through the ranks of the societies that they find themselves in. Now that's the premise, and from here on out we'll be discussing more in-depth spoilers that include elements of the book that may or may not ruin certain things. I'm not going to be jumping too far ahead in the plot, but I will be going over certain tidbits in regards to Nadine that could give you a heads up on where things will be going. That's your warning, as I genuinely don't want to spoil things no matter what the channel's called. Anyway, similar to last week, the episode has a non-linear way of telling the story, and we pick up with Larry making his way to the free zone in Boulder after receiving a message from Mother Abigail. One thing I forgot to mention last week that adds to the duality aspect of the series is that Abigail and Randall Flagg both juxtapose each other in several ways. The former is an old black woman, whereas Flagg appears to be a young white man, and before you can say get woke go broke, just bear in mind the book was written about 42 years ago. Now Abigail's dreamscape takes place in a field, whilst Flagg's is amongst a rocky desert environment. Thus we have this idea of one being with nature, whilst the other is a harsh landscape that is slowly being taken over by symbolisms of sin, such as Las Vegas. I've heard it's a lovely place though. Now Larry is joined by an autistic boy named Joe, and also a woman called Nadine Cross. Though it's not really touched upon in the episode, Nadine is actually a virgin, and that's probably because she poops in your bed. I'm sorry, I'll stop. No, she's a virgin because every time someone gets close to her, it's like some outside force sweeps in and scares the person off. In the book, Nadine actually believes that this is tied to some sacred dark person, and that she must wait for him so that he can be her first. Joe also goes on a journey in the book, and we discover that he's actually called Leo, but due to his regressed state, he's never spoken or told anyone his true name. The group arrive at Boulder and meet Stu, which shocks Larry as somehow he already knows his name. We discover that everyone who's ventured to the area has had a vision of Abigail, which has drawn them to it, and that she's reached out to the survivors in order to pull them together. Jump to 5 months earlier, and we join Larry, who's about to perform on stage, minus his band. Because of Captain Trips, they've all become sick, but after seeing his mother, he decides to head out on stage. Now this differs highly from the source material, as in that Larry was already massively successful, and here he's sort of on the come up. Because of his chart-topping song, Baby Can You Dig Your Man, in the work he had turned to a life of drugs. Now though that's laced through this, it is slightly altered here, but it's something that you should be aware of as his stardom was more prominent in the source material. Bit off topic, but with the year we've had in 2020, did anyone else find this gig scene a bit, I don't know, it's a bit close to home. It's kinda crazy looking back and seeing just how accurate King's predictions were, especially with how ignorant everyone was. Unless they have it, no one's paying attention to the disease, and Larry is even caught snatching stage drinks without anti-backing his hands 50 times, because, everyone's just living wild and free. His friend Wayne Stuckey arrives, but unlike the original work, he's clearly got a grudge against the character. In the book, Wayne was actually someone who tried to turn Larry away from descending into darkness, and he was portrayed as more of a good guy rather than someone who would hold a gun to their friend over stealing a chorus. At the same time, Lloyd is being locked up, and we learn that he was part of a botched armed robbery in which his partner went crazy and tried to get him to pokerize a shopkeeper. Yeah, King's dialogue doesn't always work. Now a policeman intervened and was killed by his friend, and thus Lloyd took the fall in the end. In the original work, Lloyd was actually a mass murderer, whereas here he's clearly reluctant when it comes to killing. Similar to what we see in the source material, he teams up with Randall, but due to the way that the series is diverting from the work, I think he might also go on a different tangent. Anyway, Nadine meets Franny and we get a tour of the town whilst they discuss the dream summoning, and the former agrees to take care of Joe as a maternal figure. Cut to the dreamscape again and we see Randall trying to tempt Larry by putting his name up in lights with a Las Vegas sign. He's awoken from this by memories of New York, namely the outbreak in which his mother came down with Captain Trips and thus died from it. Larry took her out of the hospital and she passed away in his home whilst the rest of the world completely collapsed around him. To make matters worse, Wayne also arrived with a gun, however he too died, and thus Larry was able to take his stash of drugs from the trunk of his car and party like it's the end of the world. Now he does carry this with him throughout most of the episode and we don't actually learn what happens to it, so I'm guessing that further down the line it will pop up again. It wasn't in the book, so I can't really say what's going to be going on with it, but yeah, just something to bear in mind as we go into the other episodes. He wakes up on a bench in Central Park and finds the world a completely different place in which everyone is able to do what they want. Yes, I will join you running naked at Yankee Stadium. Woo woo! We can be the Yankee Wankies. Now we hear gunfire far off in the distance, and I believe that this might be the group we encounter later on. Larry makes his way through the park, and it's at this point he comes across Rita Blakemore, played by Heather Graham. The pair actually discuss a character known as the Monster Shouter, and though he doesn't feature in this entry, he was present in the original show and book. The Monster Shouter was a religious homeless man that stood shouting, "Bring out your dead," and the character preached that doomsday was approaching, but here he doesn't even get a cameo. He was originally played by Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and his corpse was found stabbed to death in the street, but here he's completely omitted. We do hear him shouting later on, which is followed by more shooting, so I'm guessing that he was killed by the gang. R.I.P. Now back in the present time, Larry's taken to see Abigail in what's a sort of Oracle from the Matrix meeting. He's not allowed to say what she told him, but I do think that this will of course be revealed in the series. Larry is also introduced to Nick Andros, who's a deaf mute that's blind in one eye. Intercut with this are Larry's nightmares of Flag, and it's clear that Abigail knows he's sought out by the villain. Now in the past we watch as Rita and Larry get it on, and they decide to leave New York after it becomes clear that the city is dangerous. They're stumbled upon by a man who offers Larry $1 million to take Rita off his hand, and hey, not the worst deal that's been offered this year. After turning it down, more men arrive with guns, and thus Larry and Rita flee into the sewers. In the original work they actually went through the Lincoln Tunnel, which was filled with the dead, but in both the pair split up after Rita becomes overwhelmed by the environment. Larry hallucinates his mother's body in the sewage and sees rats crawling out of her mouth, which is enough to give anyone nightmares. However, he makes it through and finds Rita on the other side, which is where the pair finally leave the city. Now one of the big mysteries that surrounds this entry is what actually happened to her. As we know from the flash forwards, she's not at the camp, and we discover that she actually ends her own life in order to escape the hell that she's found herself in. I don't know, man, the Yankee Wankies wasn't that bad. It should have just come with us anyway. In the tunnels, I think she realised that Larry just had his own interests at heart and wouldn't stay with her, and thus she was truly alone. Larry cared more about the stash than he did her, and he carried that through the sewers instead of ditching it in order to care for the character. Now the show does hide her fate, so it is possible that she could return down the line, but in the book it is actually revealed that she died. In the work we discover that Larry woke up next to her dead body, and it was probably one of the most shocking scenes in the piece. This of course mirrored his mother's death and his hallucination, and I was actually surprised that they didn't include this reveal of her, as I think it would have been a fitting way to show how he was haunted by this motif. Again though, they didn't show a body, so she could still be alive, but I guess we'll find out one way or the other. Now at Boulder, we see as Nadine, Joe and Larry settle into their new digs. Nadine stares out the window, and we get the feeling that Flag has been watching her. They never meet, but she does get drawn towards a planchette, which is basically a Ouija board that she will likely use to reach out to him. Elsewhere, Larry comes face to face with Harold, and we see that he looks up to him because of the signs that he left. Larry and Harold do share some common ground, as both believe that a woman was taken from them because of the circumstances, and I think that the pair will become a lot closer in the season. Now I haven't been talking too much about Lloyd because, due to being trapped in a prison, very little actually happens to him. Being locked in his cell whilst the majority of people die around him means that he has to resort to cannibalism and eating rats in order to survive. Flag appears at the end and turns the magical stone he's been carrying into a key with the initials RF on it, so that he's constantly indebted to him. Flag could have freed him at any time, but instead he waited until he was at his lowest and had sunk into eating others so that he had a powerful ally. In the original work, Lloyd is very much Flag's right-hand man, and this character is the first one that we've seen him recruit personally. This shows how important he is to the villain, and the episode ends with the two going off together, with Flag saying that he believes this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship. This of course references Casablanca, and hey, I'm part of the Yankee Wankers, so nice little way to close out the worst video I've ever made. Now that wraps up the entry, and don't forget that on the 30th of December we're giving away 3 copies of the Lord of the Rings 4K box set to our subscribers. All you have to do to be with a chance of winning, it's like the video, for whatever reason, make sure you subscribe with notifications on, and drop a comment below with your thoughts on the entry. If you want something else to watch, then make sure you check out our breakdown of the first episode, which will be linked on screen right now. We cover everything you need to know about Stu and Harold, so definitely check it out after this. With that out of the way, thank you for sitting through the video, and if you're watching this before Christmas, then I hope you had a good one. I've been Paul, you've been the best, and I'll see you next week. Take care, much love, peace.